Okay, members, one more time. Mr. Knight, Mr. Silva, Mr. Tran, Mr. Fletcher, Mr. Smythe, Mr. Nilo, Mr. Nestande, Mr. V. Manuel Perez, Ms. Skinner. If these members would come down to the floor so we can start. Mr. De Leon, Ms. Caballero, Mr. Mendoza, Mr. Anderson, Mr. Miller, Mr. Cotto, Mr. Jeffries, Ms. Harkey, Ms. Hayashi, Ms. Galgiani, Mr. DeVore, Mr. Nielsen, Mr. Norby, Mr. Logue, Ms. Fuller, Mr. Delatorre, Mr. Gaines, Mr. Tom Berryhill, Mr. Bill Berryhill, Mr. Gilmore, Mr. Verlines, Mr. Liu, Mr. Hernandez, Ms. Strickland, Ms. Conway, Mr. Blumenfield, Ms. Buchanan, Mr. Bell, and Mr. Jones. If those members would please come down to the floor so we can begin. We do have a quorum. We ask our guests and visitors in the rear of the chamber and in the gallery to please stand for the prayer. We ask our Assembly Chaplain, Father Constantine Papadimos, to offer the day's prayer.
Good morning. Let us pray. Lord, many times the condition of our lives reflects the condition of our heart. When our thoughts dwell on negative, hopeless, and mediocre things, our life can go down the same path. Lord, help us to capture our thoughts and renew our minds and hearts with your invisible power. Keep us from dwelling on any destructive thought that comes to mind. Instead, inspire us to think and to speak and to act in a way that is pleasing to you always. Amen.
We ask our guests and visitors to continue to stand and join us in the flag salute. We ask Assembly Member Monning to lead us in the pledge. Mr. Monning. You may be seated. Reading of the previous day's journal.
Assembly Chamber, Sacramento, Tuesday, August 31st, 2010. The Assembly met at 10 a.m. The Honorable Fiona Moss, Speaker Pro Tem of the Assembly, presiding. Chief Clerk E. Dotson Wilson at the desk. Assistant Clerk Timothy Moreland reading. The roll was called. Assembly Member Bradford moved a quorum call of the Assembly. Motion carried. Time 10:01 a.m. The Speaker Pro Tem directed the Sergeant at Arms to close the doors.
Mr. Calderon moves and Mr. Garrick seconds that the reading of the previous day's journal be dispensed with. Presentations of petitions, there are none. Introduction and reference of bills will be deferred. Reports of committees will be deemed read and amendments deemed adopted. Messages from the Governor, there are none. Messages from the Senate, there are none. Motions and resolutions. The absences for the day will be deemed read and printed in the journal. Mr. Calderon, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, I request unanimous consent to allow Assembly Members Amiano, Jim Bell, Mr. Bradford, Conway, Hill to speak on adjourn in memory today.
Without objection.
And also, I request unanimous consent to allow the authors to print a letter to the journalists. Well, let me hold off on that because we're still not sure whether it's here or not. And we're going to have to wait. Well, I have a number of other motions that we need to take up, but we need to get concurrence by the minority members, Republican minority members. So if you give me a second here, I can do that.
Mr. Hill, would you like to take up your adjourn in memory? Mr. Hill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I ask for your indulgence as I discuss the adjourn in memory I have today. I request and thank you for allowing me to adjourn this august body today in memory of the lives lost due to the natural gas line explosion on September 9th in the Glenview neighborhood of the city of San Bruno within my district, which resulted in a state of emergency being declared. As a result of the explosion and the subsequent fire, 8 people died, 66 were injured, 34 homes were destroyed, and 15 acres were charred. Damages are estimated at over $50 million. I want to take a brief moment, if I could, to highlight the 8 lives we lost in this disaster. Jacqueline Grigg, 44, an employee of the California Public Utilities Commission. Jacqueline's daughter, Jenissa Gregg, 13, a student at St. Cecilia's Catholic School in San Francisco. They are survived by husband and father Greg and daughter and sister Gabriela. Elizabeth Torres, 81, a mother of 9 and a longtime employee of UC San Francisco. She is survived by her children and grandchildren. Jessica Morales, 20, a student at the Academy of Art College in San Francisco. She is survived by her mother, Renee Morales, and numerous others. Levon Bullis, 85 years of age, a retired registered nurse. Levon's son, Gregory Bullis, 50, a medical claims adjuster. William Bullis, 17 years of age. That's Levon's grandson and Gregory's son, a student at Mills High School in Millbrae. They are survived by Sue Bullis, Greg's wife, and William's mother, Janine Bullis, Greg's daughter, and William's sister, and Janine Bullis Young and Gary Bullis. And James Franco, who is 58 years old, a former pest control technician who is survived by numerous loved ones. I also want to thank all of the emergency responders and law enforcement officials who came from all over the Bay Area, and also CAL FIRE from the state, who brought their tankers in to stop that fire from spreading out of that neighborhood. They did an amazing job of containing the blaze, assisting local residents, and really limited the number of lives that could have been lost in this disaster. So I ask that we adjourn this meeting today in memory of those people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Mr. Amiano, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, I would like your attention for these memorials, and particularly Mr. Hill's eloquent eulogies for those people who were basically incinerated due to great negligence. I don't know how their families or that community is ever going to repair their fabric, but I'm certainly hopeful that the legislature will take all the correct steps to make sure that never happens. Unfortunately, we're often visited by tragedy on a more national level as well, and I rise today to adjourn in memory of the 9 teenage boys who died last month as a result of anti-gay bullying. I was brought up in the 40s and 50s in New Jersey and was mercilessly harassed for my school career. I would try to find different ways home every day so that I would not be assaulted or beat up or name-called. It never failed to amaze me that I was about 5'3", weighed about 112 pounds, yet it was always 3 or 4, usually male bullies, who felt that they needed their masculinity and their breadth and their weight to try to harm me. As a matter of fact, you can imagine how people's academic careers suffer when you're totally worried about being not only beaten up but exposed. I had in those days a tremendous amount of shame about my sexual orientation. I did not want to burden my parents. My parents worked very, very hard, basically for a subsistence living. I just felt I could not go to them. Certainly, I did go to a Catholic school. There was very, very little help in those days from the church, even though my family and I were practicing Catholics and devout ones. Hopefully the world will be a better place since the 40s and 50s, but for these 9 young men, certainly it was not. Imagine for a moment just how much constant bullying it would take to hurt a person so much and for so long that they would want to end their own life. Many young people decide they would rather kill themselves than endure another day of harassment. Cody Baker, 17, lived in Chicoutimi, Wisconsin. He was planning to start a gay-straight alliance at his high school and was a sincere, passionate advocate for everyone who was alienated by their high school for being different, especially those targeted for their sexual orientation or gender expression. Billy Lucas, 15, loved animals and spent his last few hours with his beloved horses. He was bullied constantly by his peers in Greensburg, Indiana, and was told more than once that he should just go kill himself. Tyler Clementi, 18, attended Rutgers University in New Jersey and was a highly accomplished violinist. He was a victim of cyberbullying and killed himself after learning that his roommate had been spreading videos of his private life. His last words were via Facebook status, "Jumping off the GW Bridge, sorry." That's the George Washington Bridge. Harrison Chase Brown, 15, from Colorado, was subjected to anti-gay harassment. The obituary in a local newspaper claimed that he died suddenly, but his friends revealed that he took his own life due to intense bullying. Asher Brown, a 13-year-old from Texas, who was also a victim of bullying based on his sexual orientation, religion, height, and the way he dressed. The bullying was reported numerous times to his school, but no action was ever taken. Seth Walsh, 13, died in California after staying on life support for 9 days. He hung himself. He was a kind and artistic with a beautiful smile despite the bullying he received for being gay. Raymond Chase, 19, attended Johnson and Wales in Rhode Island, studying to become a chef when he hung himself in his dorm. Felix Sacco, a senior at Saugus High School in Massachusetts, was a quiet kid, remembered for his passion for playing guitar and film. His friends say he was bullied leading up to his death just because he was different. Caleb Nolt, 14, lived in Indiana. He was at the butt end of anti-gay bullying, though it is unclear whether or not he was gay. Regardless, Caleb's death goes to show that homophobia affects more than just gay people. Our society must proactively learn to stop these suicides. We must give parents, educators, and youth the tools to help victims stop their tormentors and to begin the long process of healing. There are some great programs out there working to help prevent youth suicide. Programs like the Trevor Project are out there listening to the problems of young people and reminding them that life can get better. I'd also like to invite all of us to the candlelight vigils and other events in memory of these 9 young people, which will be held in cities across our state and nation over the next few days. I respectfully ask that we adjourn in the memory of these 9 young men.
Thank you. Mr. Bell?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I ask that we adjourn today in memory of Donald Burr. His friends and family and many Californians had Don as a public servant for over 52 years. Donald served as the Campbell police chief, a council member, and the mayor of Campbell. He joined the Campbell Police Department in 1956 and was one of only 5 officers patrolling the town back then. He rose to the ranks of being police chief in 1972, served in that capacity to 1987 when he retired. He next served as a council member in 1988 and served for 2 terms, then returned to the council in 2000 and served again until 2008. During his tenure on the council, he served as the mayor 4 times and was named Citizen of the Year in 1998. He passed on October 3rd. He was an extraordinary public servant, dedicating his life to the public and the kind we should all aspire to be. He was 76. I ask that we adjourn in his memory.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Mr. Bradford?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today and adjourn in the memory of Theodore Roosevelt Johnson, a constituent of mine, but more so a mentor, a father figure to me and many other host of young men who grew up in the community of Gardena and the surrounding areas of Los Angeles. An individual at the age of 15 started working for LA Unified School District, and at the time of his retirement, after 41 years of employment, had 2 years of vacation and sick time on the book due to his strong dedication and work ethic that he demonstrated. An individual who started his career at LA Unified cleaning the grounds and retired as an area supervisor of transportation. An individual who met his first love and only love at 15 and married her at 16, and a union that led for 61 years to 3 sons, Theodore Jr., Edmund, and Philip Johnson. He's the father-in-law of Councilwoman Rachel Johnson in the city of Gardena. He's left a host of grandkids and numerous friends and relatives throughout the state of California and this nation. He's a fine example of what manhood was. He was a fine example of what family values were and a fine example of work ethic. And I am deeply saddened that his services are taking place right now as I'm here. But I just want to recognize his life, his contribution to not only me, to many others, and I respectfully ask for adjournment in the memory of Theodore Roosevelt Johnson.
Mr. Furutani.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members. I joined with Assemblymember Bradford relative to the passing of a very good friend. Theodore Johnson was not only someone that worked for the LA Unified School District and drove our kids back and forth to school, and then became a labor leader within that organization, SEIU, for many years. The Johnson family has really had an indelible mark on the city of Gardena. Not only did they mentor the likes of Steve Bradford, but other young brothers and sisters that came up through the ranks and now are serving that community so well. Steve here in the Assembly and Rachel Johnson in the City Council of Gardena. Really a great family. I'm sorry for their loss. I, like Steve, am sorry that I'm here, although it's good to be here to take care of some business, but I would have loved to have been at the funeral for Mr. Johnson. Thank you very much.
Thank you, members. Please bring those names forward so they can be recorded in the file. Okay, members, there will be no passes given today. All meals will be brought in, so we will not have any breaks, and we're going to try to move through the file as we get the bills. So we're ready to start on the budget bills. Mr. Calderon, you are recognized.
Yes, Madam Speaker, there's a list of bills at the desk. I request that the clerk read those bills, and I request unanimous consent to adopt amendments with respect to those bills that are at the desk.
Without objection. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 870 with amendments, Senate Bill 854 with amendments, Senate Bill 856 with amendments, Senate Bill 857 with amendments, Senate Bill 852 with amendments, Senate Bill 853 with amendments, Senate Bill 858 with amendments, Senate Bill 859 with amendments, Senate Bill 860 with amendments, Senate Bill 861 with amendments, Senate Bill 864 with amendments, Senate Bill 868 with amendments, Senate Bill 869 with amendments, and Senate Bill 872 with amendments, and Senate Bill 871 with amendments.
Okay, without objection. Oh, Mr. Hagman, you're recognized.
Madam Speaker, I didn't have 871. I won't object to everything besides the last one about checking first. I didn't have 871 on my list.
Okay. SB 871 is, we're going to take a vote. Is not part of the motion. On the bills that were just read, is there any objection to a voice vote on adopting those amendments? Okay, all those signify by the sign of aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The Senate amendments are adopted. Mr. Calderon.
And now, there are amendments at the desk for SB 866. I request unanimous consent to adopt those amendments. I believe the minority party has objections.
Mr. Hagman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We request a roll call vote on that matter.
Clerk will read the bill with the amendments.
Senate Bill 866 with amendments by Senator Bloomfield.
Okay, Mr. Calderon asked for an aye vote. Mr. Hagman asked for a no vote on these amendments. Clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Mr. Calderon's asking for an aye vote. Mr. Hagman is asking for a no vote. This is the majority present in voting. Ayes 34, noes 18. Measure passes. Senate amendments are adopted. Mr. Calderon.
Okay, Madam Speaker, I request unanimous consent to withdraw ACA 4 from the Budget Committee and to order the bill to third reading.
Without objection.
I also request unanimous consent to allow Mr. Gatto to take up ACA 4 without reference to file for purposes of the amendment.
Without objection. Clerk will read the bill with the amendments.
Assembly Constitutional Amendment 4 with amendments by Assemblymember Gatto.
All those in favor of the amendment say aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The amendments are adopted. Permission was granted to take this up without reference to file. In mock-up form, clerk will read.
Assembly Constitutional Amendment number 4 by Assemblymember Gatto, an act relating to state finance.
Mr. Gatto.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This bill would place on the ballot a proposed constitutional amendment to implement an enhanced and improved rainy day fund. And members, you've all received briefings on this legislation. Despite the very detailed ways that people describe it, this is very simple. The state of California would follow the practices that every household in this state understands. We put away money when times are good, so we have some money left over when times are bad. Specifically, this bill would require that the state places 10% of general fund revenue into a savings account of sorts, which can be drawn down when there are budget deficits like today. This doubles the amount required by current law. It is worth emphasizing that the state would not be required to put aside these revenues during bad times, and the 10% would be deposited only after we fulfill all outstanding obligations to education. And in years where we have extra revenue, the state would be mandated to ease the burden on future generations by paying off debt. What a concept. A great and historic move. I want to express my opinion on what this does for the hardworking people of this state, particularly those who work for the state in some capacity. You know, I might be one of the youngest members of the legislature, but I remember the boom years well. And you surely know that in those years, the legislature spent a lot of money on things other than jobs and salaries. I'm talking pork. And yet in bad times, who are the people who find their salaries and benefits under attack? It's working men and women. By stabilizing our state finances, I believe this would prevent a lot of the blame game that occurs during bad times. I think this would help working men and women. My final comments pertain to the consequences of this measure that are often overlooked, but which should not be underestimated. At one point this year, California's credit rating soared to 1.25 points higher than that what other states were paying. Think about that. By most estimates, the state has $110 billion in year-on-year traditional debt. By paying more in interest than other states have to pay, that could mean California, our taxpayers, pay as much as $1.25 billion a year in extra borrowing costs because of California's poor credit rating. Well, just like a home purchaser with a big savings account gets a better mortgage rate, by building a reserve, the state's creditworthiness goes up and our borrowing costs go down. I don't think there's anybody in this room who wouldn't like having an extra $1.25 billion in our budget. I don't think there's anybody in California who wouldn't trade the wild rides of the past decade's crazy budgets for a more stable system. This constitutional amendment would do just that. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Mr. Nilo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Budget reform, particularly putting a cap on spending when things do recover, so as to force us to set up truly meaningful reserves, the rainy day fund, is something that I've been working on for several years. I was the author of the bill that was Proposition 1A that unfortunately didn't pass. This time, hopefully it will. This bill is based largely on ACA 37, which was co-authored by Mr. Valines and I, and been reconstituted into ACA 4, keeping it in the Italian caucus, Mr. Gatto and Mr. Niello, and it is Mr. Gatto explained it very well. I won't go through that again, but this is essential budget reform to help us in the future, make our future better. I urge an aye vote.
Seeing no further questions or debate, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. 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 Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 55, noes 1. Measure passes. Mr. Calderon.
Yes, there are two more bills at the desk, SB 867 and SB 871, and I request unanimous consent to take up these, for adoption of these amendments.
Without objection, clerk will read.
Senate Bill 867 with amendments and Senate Bill 871 with amendments.
Any objection to a voice vote? Seeing none, we will take a voice vote on these amendments. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The Senate amendments are adopted. Okay, we're going to go to file item 33, SB 870. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 870 by the Senate Committee on Budget and Fiscal Review, an act relating to the Budget Act 2011.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Madam Speaker, members, SB 870 is the 2010-11 budget bill, and it is the centerpiece of the 2010-11 budget package. It bridges a $17.9 billion deficit. It contains $7.5 billion in difficult cuts. However, it doesn't raise taxes on families. It keeps education and college funding stable. It preserves the 430,000 jobs that would have been lost under the governor's May revised proposal. And it does not decimate our social safety net. It ends up with a final reserve of $364 million. Members, it's time to get this budget done and move forward with the business of the state. Friday will mark 100 days that this budget is overdue. I know a lot of us have things in this budget that we really don't like, but it is a compromise that reflects the harsh realities of the two-thirds consensus on how we have to deal with the dire impact of the third consecutive year of recession. Our general fund used to be over $100 billion. It's now around $85 billion. But the call on state services has gone up and not down. I've often heard the phrase, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Well, let's take a moment to reflect on this budget. It isn't perfect. And frankly, a lot of the decisions that we have to make in this budget aren't very good either. One way to frame some of the choices is to say, don't let the good be the enemy of the sufficient. Because this budget, though, is sufficient. It's sufficient to address the crisis before us, and it does some good. There are actually a few bright spots in this budget despite the dire economic circumstances and despite the economy, which we'll go into as we detail in the trailer bills. This bill took thousands of hours and hundreds of individuals to hammer out and craft the agreement that we have before us today. That's part of a package of more than 20 bills. Let's pass this budget and commit to working together to make sure we avoid being in this situation again next year. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Ms. Harkey.
Madam Speaker and members and press that are here, this bill crossed the desk, I understand, at 9:36 this morning. It is 3 books, as you can see. I've not had any time to even look at it. So I can't extol its virtue or proclaim anything wrong with it. I simply can't vote under these circumstances. Thank you.
Mr. Garrick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Today we are voting on a budget as identified, SB 870. This is the latest budget in state history, and I'm deeply disappointed that it's taken us 99 days into the new fiscal year to reach an agreement. We started a countdown on March 23rd of 100 days to the constitutional obligation for a balanced budget that would have ended on June 30th. Today, we are 99 days later after that deadline and still do not have a budget. We'll be voting on it today, and I'd like to highlight some of the things in it. I do believe that this compromise helps navigate our state through a difficult recession and in the right direction. The budget does 3 very important things.
First, it doesn't hurt struggling taxpayers, out-of-work Californians, and our state's economic recovery. Second, it helps bring state spending closer to living within its means. And third, it includes reforms that will benefit our state this year and into the future. California has a $19.1 billion budget deficit. All of us know it. We've had a downturn in our economy, less revenues coming into the state. We also have 12.4% unemployment in this state. My caucus has been adamant all year long about lawmakers cannot balance the budget on the backs of taxpayers, job creators, and those who are working hard in California. This budget passes these tests. It includes no new taxes on hardworking Californians that would stifle our economic growth. It also preserves job creation incentives that will help California's competitiveness. It creates investment in research and development, growth in jobs in our state, and keeps us competitive with our neighbors. These are victories for our state and should help us ensure that California does not have an economic recovery that falters. This budget brings the state closer to living within its means. It includes $7.5 billion in spending reductions made necessary by less revenues. It also maintains education funding at last year's levels while including a modest increase in per-pupil spending. Let me repeat that. It maintains education funding at last year's levels while including a modest increase in per-pupil spending. And finally, this budget includes long-term reform on budget and pension issues. Linked in this budget is a bill to place a rainy day fund that we just voted on, the ballot, that will ensure that the state saves money when times are good and has a reserve to draw on when those economic times turn down. We are also finally tackling pension reform. This budget will roll back pension giveaways passed back in 1999 when the stock market was booming and everything in the economy was looking very rosy. This alone should save billions of dollars over the next 20 years. First, by changing the calculation of new hires, prohibiting pension spiking, and keeping CalPERS honest on pension costs and projected pension returns. This budget is not perfect by any means and will not satisfy everyone, but taken as a whole is a step in the right direction towards getting our state's fiscal house in order. This budget will not take more from taxpayers and will not kill California jobs. It moves us forward and deserves our support today. I urge an aye vote.
Mr. DeVore.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. This probably marks my last day as a member of this body, last series of votes, and it is with some degree of melancholy that I look at the budget process. Yes, there have been some things that have been moved in the right direction through an enormous amount of hard work by the minority, by the Republican leader in the Assembly and in the Senate. But there's so much more work to be done. A little over 4 years ago, I stood on the floor of this Assembly and warned my colleagues about the coming slowdown in the economy. I implored my colleagues to save a little more for a rainy day. But instead, we expanded the budget by double digits again, and we spent everything. And sure enough, within a year, things began to slow down. Ladies and gentlemen, we have taken a few steps in the right direction, but I'm afraid that they are a few too many steps. Now, of course, my party only has 27 of the 80 seats in this body. It is very difficult to negotiate with a majority that has a completely different worldview and believes that taxes should be higher and government even bigger. If this budget passes out today, and I believe it will, while it does take a few steps in the right direction, I sadly have to say that I believe that shortly after the November election, things will begin to implode, and once again, this body will be called back together to patch a leaking budget. Ladies and gentlemen, California continues to spend beyond its means. We continue to drive both big and small business out of this state. Unless we have a major course correction, this will not improve anytime soon. So while this budget does take a few important and modest steps in the right direction, it does not yet go far enough. Ladies and gentlemen, we have some tough decisions to make in this body. And unfortunately, I believe that we've only taken a small step in the right direction with this budget.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I rise in strong support of this budget plan. Before I speak on the budget plan and its merits, I want to take a moment to talk about how it is that we've gotten here today. From the moment that I was sworn in as Speaker, I've consistently said that this budget must be arrived at in an open process and a transparent process, that the people of California have every right and expectation to know what decisions their leaders are making, and in a year where we face such enormous challenges, that expectation of transparency becomes an imperative of transparency. We've held up to that commitment. We've held over 100 hearings here in the Capitol. We've held forums throughout the state, in Fresno and San Diego, Palm Springs, Orange County, Albany, Reseda, and here in Sacramento. Thousands of Californians participated in these hearings and forums. We clearly outlined the scope of the problem and the impact of the various proposals put forward that purported to be solutions. Within the context of the past several years, and especially last year, this is an unprecedented level of openness and transparency in our budgetary process. That transparency has fundamentally strengthened the final product we're voting on today. From the moment this process began, we outlined the principles we believed the final budget should reflect. We said that the budget should reflect the priorities and values of Californians. We said that the budget should protect the 430,000 jobs that would have been eliminated in the May revise. And we said the budget should make good economic decisions that don't harm our economy any further. We put forward a number of proposals that met those tests. We vetted them in public and used the insight we gained to strengthen and inform the final product we're voting on today. This budget protects 400,000 jobs from elimination. These are teachers and cops, firefighters, child care providers, health care workers, private business owners, all who will be able to keep working and contributing to our economy. We maintain education funding because we know a well-educated workforce is essential to California's future. We set aside $30 million to help small businesses grow and thrive by freeing up access to the capital they'll need to help them expand and hire new employees. We protect public safety programs to keep California safe. And we reject the economically hurtful tax increases that would harm California's working families. This is a solid but sober deal for California. But let's be clear, it's not a perfect budget. In an era of the Great Recession, there's no such thing as a perfect budget. Moreover, this is a budget that reflects the compromise necessary to find a two-thirds majority. This is most glaringly obvious in the fact that it's taken us nearly 100 days to approve this spending plan. The fact that we have twin supermajority requirements for both budget and revenues is directly correlated to the fact that California is routinely the last state in the union to approve a budget. However, this budget does speak to the values we've articulated throughout the process. It saves 400,000 jobs, makes good economic decisions for California, and maintains education funding. This vote today is a culmination of a lengthy and difficult process. We have begun an honest conversation with the people of California, and that conversation needs to continue. We need to continue laying that foundation for a return to prosperity and finding budget solutions that move us forward on that pathway. This budget is a natural vehicle to continue that conversation into the next year, both in terms of job creation and retention and our budget deliberations. As we approach the budget next year, we need to build on the openness and transparency that we used this year. We need to continue the hard work of creating and retaining as many jobs as possible in California, and we need to ensure that the decisions we make will continue to help our economy move farther down that pathway towards recovery. This budget, while not perfect, was produced in that process. It saves those 400,000 jobs, and it doesn't harm our economy. It makes us eligible to fully participate in federal funds that are so essential to keep our economy moving forward. This is a budget that every member can and should support, and I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Mr. Jeffries.
I frankly rise to tell you I can't tell you if this is a good budget. I look at this packet that was on our desk as we walked in this morning that contains the budget bill, and we talk about open and transparent government, and yet we now have 30 minutes, an hour, to digest all of this and make a multi-billion-dollar decision on something that we have minimal opportunity to read. This may very well be the best deal that both parties can get. This may very well be the only thing that we can achieve. But if we want to talk about going forward in an open and transparent manner, today, this last night, this is not an example of open and transparent government. We can do better, and we need to do better. And I would advocate to all of my colleagues that are returning next year that we should strive to actually bring a more open and transparent process so that we're not walking out onto the floor and looking at it for the very first time. Thank you.
Seeing no further questions or debate, Mr. Blumenfield, you may close.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Speaker has ably closed in terms of the issues that are here, and so I'm not going to address the issues on the budget. I want to make two comments, though. One is to thank the Speaker for doing such an incredible job in the final throes of this process, in the negotiation process, being there day in and day out to get us to these final conclusions. But I have to respond to these comments about how people haven't seen it. With all due respect to my colleagues, that's just utter nonsense. The reality is, this budget, the most of this budget, has been in print since August 31st. The conference committee has been the most transparent process that we've had in years. And while there were changes that were made, 95% of what we have today is exactly what we've seen before. And the changes that were made were in a historic way brought forward in a conference committee hearing yesterday, where all of those changes were outlined and brought forward for the public to see and for all of us to see. There's always issues with drafting and getting things at different times, but the documents that we have, the stack of documents, is something that we have had a good opportunity to look at, most of it. And with that, I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. 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 Mr. Calderon?
Call.
Mr. Calderon moves the call. Fall item 17, SB 854. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 854 by the Senate Committee on Budget and Fiscal Review, an act relating to transportation, declaring the urgency thereof to take effect immediately.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this is the Transportation Trailer Bill. It makes statutory changes necessary to enact the transportation budget. Among other things, what this will do is it gives local relief for transportation expenditure deadlines, for HUDA, for Proposition 1B expenditures. It also makes changes that allow for an additional $100 million in savings for the general fund through various transportation borrowing mechanisms. It strengthens the High-Speed Rails Authority management staffing and enacts various reporting requirements to increase the transparency of the authority. And lastly, it requires that the DMV identify California veterans in order to connect them with federal benefits. I ask for your aye vote on this trailer bill.
Ms. Harkey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Once again, I point out to you that this bill does include, in essence, an approval of High-Speed Rail Authority without any accounting. While they say that they're allowing more accountability for the state legislature to be reviewing on a regular basis, there is no starting point from which to begin monitoring. We need a credit analysis. We need an investment grade financial analysis done on this project. We issued a bond. We were promised, the people of California were promised, that we would have an investment grade financial analysis. We need to get that going. We cannot monitor spending if we don't have a start point and we have no idea where we're supposed to be at any given point in time. When this legislature leaves, the new legislature coming in won't understand what they're even supposed to be looking at. And I find this in just about every major expenditure in the state, but in particular with this new expenditure that could really skyrocket, we need to be very, very careful. And to constantly keep saying it has all this reporting, and it's great, it has an incomplete and unrealistic financial plan, no risk management strategy, ridership estimates are too optimistic, no plan for future building ability, uninformative timelines, service reductions in lieu of fiscal panic. I mean, there's absolutely no basis from which to go forward with this project until we get an investment grade financial analysis. So the people of California approved $9 billion. That is startup funds. But we need, before we get rolling with this, literally before it gets rolling down the track, we need to find out what it is people in California are financing, and with whose money, and at what point, what time, and how to track it to be sure the project is tracking to projections. We need that. We would require that for any bond offering. Wall Street would require that for investors. The people of California are making an investment here, and we've allowed in this package of bonds, we've allowed millions of dollars to fund high-speed rail, and we have nothing from which to track. So there's a lot more in these, which is why I didn't vote. But in this bill in particular, it's got a few good things, but we need to keep pointing out we need accountability and some access for ourselves as well as future legislators to know where to begin, how to track, and how to monitor this multi-billion-dollar project that could further add to the decline in our state's finances and will definitely if it goes forward. Thank you.
Seeing no further questions or debate, Mr. Blumenfield, you may close.
Thank you. I would just point out if, this bill has some, when we're talking about high-speed rail, since that was brought up, has some accountability mechanisms in it. If you think there should be more accountability mechanisms, great. Run a bill next year. People can talk about it and debate it. But in terms of this budget, what we're talking about in this trailer bill is accountability mechanisms. So to vote no on this would be saying that you don't want any accountability. This has accountability in it, and I urge your aye vote.
Clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. 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 This bill requires 54 votes. Mr. Calderon moves the call. File item 19, SB 856. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 856 by the Senate Committee on Budget and Fiscal Review, an act relating to state government, making an appropriation therefore and declaring the urgency thereof.
Mr. Blumenfield. Mr. Blumenfield.
Okay. 856. It says 856 as opposed to. I thought we were doing the other one first. But okay. Thought we were doing the other one first. Okay. This bill, SB 856. This is the general government bill. It makes technical and statutory changes necessary to do the following: to eliminate the practice of the state to provide funds to locals to make up the difference between new vehicle license fees for trailers as compared to the old calculation. It captures $13.7 million in general fund savings in 09-10, resulting from the fee revenue that now supports the state forensic labs. And it provides $30 million from the Indian Gaming Special Distribution Fund in the form of grants to local government agencies impacted by tribal gaming. It makes other technical and conforming changes, and I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Seeing no further questions or debate, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Mr. Calderon moves the call. File item SB 857. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 857 by the Senate Committee on Budget and Fiscal Review, an act relating to courts and declaring the urgency thereof to take effect immediately.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, this is the Judiciary Trailer Bill. It makes technical and statutory changes necessary to do the following: to enact various temporary fee increases necessary to provide funding for the state's trial courts in order to end the one-day per month closing of courts and prevent additional layoffs of court employees. On this one, I want to make a special shout out to Assemblyman Mike Fuhrer for his hard work in helping broker this deal. This bill also establishes various methods to enhance the collection of debt and improve recovery efforts. It establishes the financial audits of trial courts and the administrative office of the courts. It implements a pilot program to assess the benefits and impacts of requiring subcontractors to pay for employee health expenses for construction field employees. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Mr. Fuhrer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Blumenfield. I just wanted to say to all our colleagues, the court system is a very fragile system. Access to justice in the past year has been curtailed because courts have been closed around the state. The consequences of those court closures have been significant for the economy and significant for individuals in all our districts. The reason that this measure is able to prevent future closures is that the participants in the system agreed that they themselves should pay a little more so that everybody can have access to courts. I've never seen this before here, where folks have agreed that the consequences of a certain situation are so significant that they're prepared to have increases on fees on themselves. So this is something we should support on a strong bipartisan basis. The economic consequences of state court closures are severe. The consequences to our basic system of justice in our state have been severe. We can rectify those with this vote. I urge a bipartisan aye vote.
Seeing no further questions or debate, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Mr. Calderon moves the call. File item 29, SB 866. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 866 by the Senate Committee on Budget and Fiscal Review, an act relating to local government finance, making an appropriation therefore and declaring the urgency thereof to take effect immediately.
Mr. Blumenfield.
This bill would result in changes regarding local governments, cities, counties, and special districts. Deals with local government mandate securitization and allows local governments to sell their mandate receivables that are owed to them by the state. Basically, they can get the upfront cash to help fund local programs and services. It adds flexibility for local governments. I ask for your aye vote.
Seeing no further questions or debate, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Okay, members, we have to strike the roll. We have the wrong bill up on the board. Okay, members, we're going to try this one more time. SB 866. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 866 by the Senate Committee on Budget and Fiscal Review, an act relating to local government finance, making an appropriation therefore and declaring an urgency thereof to take effect immediately.
Mr. Blumenfield, you have to open again on SB 866.
I repeat what I said earlier, and I ask for your aye vote.
Seeing no further questions or debate, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Mr. Calderon moves the call. Mr. Calderon.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I request unanimous consent to pass amendments to SB 208 by Mr. Monty.
And without objection, the bill is removed from the inactive file.
Thank you.
Clerk will read with amendments.
Senate Bill 208 by Senator Steinberg with amendments by Assemblymember Bloomfield.
Mr. Monning.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, SB 208 is part of a two-bill package enacting the statutory changes necessary to implement the state's new comprehensive Medi-Cal demonstration project waiver. By the end of this month, California will have a new 5-year waiver with the federal government. California has requested an additional $10 billion in new federal funds, including federal matching dollars for several state-only health care programs, county health care programs, and health workforce programs. This waiver contains over $2.5 billion in general fund savings over 5 years. The bill before you today makes significant improvements to the current safety net delivery system. Seniors and persons with disabilities will be mandatorily enrolled into an existing Medi-Cal managed plan. SB 208 sets into statute a number of protections for this vulnerable population, including continuity of care protections with out-of-network providers, the ability to request a specialist as a primary care physician, and an enhanced facility site review tool to assess physical accessibility of providers and facilities. SB 208 authorizes the Department of Health Care Services to establish up to 4 pilot sites to provide an integrated care program for dual eligibles. The purpose of the pilots...
Mr. Monning, we're just taking up the amendments right now.
You're not wanting the presentation on the bill. Well, you should have so indicated. Would ask your support on the amendments, and we'll jump start to this when we present the bill. Thank you. Ask for your aye votes. I'll pick up where I left off. Ask for your aye vote on the amendments. Thank you.
Any other questions or debate on the amendments? We're going to take a voice vote on these amendments. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The amendments are adopted. Permission was granted to take this bill up without reference to file. In mock-up form, clerk will read.
Senate Bill 208 by Senator Steinberg and Alquist, an act relating to Medi-Cal, making an appropriation therefore and declaring an urgency thereof to take effect immediately.
Okay, Mr. Monning, you can continue. Mr. Monning, on the bill now.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I'm just going to pick up with this educational presentation on the benefits of the Medi-Cal waiver. SB 208 authorizes the DHCS to establish organized health care delivery models for children eligible for the California Children's Services Program, known as CCS. The purpose of the pilots is to unify care management, responsibilities to serve the whole child, not the specific conditions. Members, this is an important opportunity. It should receive bipartisan support to maximize federal support for health care services and to provide relief to the general fund of the state of California. I ask for your aye vote.
Seeing no further, Mr. Delatorre.
I will not be supporting this measure, Madam Speaker and members. I ran a bill 5 years ago, on this same topic. Ran the bill through both houses, lots of debate, lots of discussion, and at the end of the day, the administration would not agree to protections for these patients. This is what we're talking about. We are talking about forcing age, blind, and disabled Medi-Cal patients into managed care. I don't have a problem with managed care. I'm a member of an HMO myself. But for this population that has special needs, that has relationships with their physician, their primary care physician, going back decades in a lot of cases, relationships with specialists who take care of their specific needs, to say to them on date certain, you are going to shift over from whatever you have now to a managed care network. Your doctor may or may not be in that network, and you're on your own, is not the right way to approach this. Those protections need to be there. The protections I had in the legislation I ran several years ago were quite simple. If the physician, the primary care physician, or the specialist that cared for that patient was in the network, then yes, absolutely, they could go into the HMO network and get their care. But if they were not, then the patient would have the right to opt in to that network and choose to be part of that HMO, choose to be part of managed care. The administration is doing this for the money savings. It's something that they have harped on year after year after year. In fact, it goes back to the Wilson administration. A lot of the same people who were here then are here now under the Schwarzenegger administration, and they're the ones who are pushing for this. Now, under the guise of a budget deal and a waiver, which isn't complete with the federal government, we are being asked to vote on this thing. I can't do it because those protections are not here for those patients that I represent that are going to be forced into this system.
Seeing no further questions or debate, Mr. Monning, you may close.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. With all due respect to my good friend and colleague who's invested a lot of time, I respect his expertise on these issues. Friends, we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. California is under a deadline to perfect our application for extension of the Medi-Cal waiver. If we do not support this bill, California is going to go into a deeper debt crisis, and the victims will be the very people who my friend wants to protect. I urge your aye vote. We need to expand services to the medically indigent, and we need to support our county's ability to capture federal reimbursement dollar for dollar, in some cases more, for what our counties are paying will be fully reimbursable. So I ask for your aye vote.
Clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Mr. Calderon moves the call. We have some special guests joining us here today. If members would move their attention to the rear of the chamber. We are here to welcome the Speaker of the Rajasthan Legislative Assembly. Speaker Dipendra Singh Shekhawat is here. Welcome and thank you for your leadership and dedication in strengthening the relationship between India and China. Mr. Calderon.
All right, Madam Speaker, I request unanimous consent for Mr. Blumenfield to take up SB 867 without reference to file.
Without objection, clerk will read.
Senate Bill 867 by Senator Hollingsworth, an act relating to public employee benefits and declaring the urgency thereof to take effect immediately.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, SB 867 is a bill that's intended to provide transparent information regarding the fund condition of the CalPERS system. As part of the budget package, we agreed to support such a transparency measure. Unfortunately, the administration has insisted on politically motivated reporting language that hardwires the analysis to make CalPERS look weak. In addition to the clumsy language that would require the Treasurer to give this report on the floor every time any of the 3,000 CalPERS employees changed contribution rates, which would mean that the Treasurer will be giving the same report hundreds of times per year. I think the reason the administration is insisting on this unrealistic language is that they think we'll forget about pensions once this budget's concluded. But as budget chair, I believe more transparency is necessary to ensure that we have confidence in our retirement funds, and I intend to work more on this issue next year. We can't force CalPERS to report to us. Voters already decided that in Proposition 162 back in 1992. So it's unlikely that if adopted, CalPERS would actually comply with this bill. However, I ask you to support me today in passing this bill to show that transparency is important and because sometimes we have to do things as part of a budget package. I hope to have the opportunity to ask you again next year to support me in some cleanup provision to replace this report with a more objective analysis of CalPERS actuarial assumptions that we all believe is credible. Therefore, I ask for your aye vote.
Mr. DeVore.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I have a question for the floor manager, if that's possible.
Without objection.
I was wondering, I know that under the current system, the treasurer, as a member of CalPERS, has had sign-off approval on pensions, including the recent pensions that have come to scandalous light in the city of Bell. Would this measure change that status at all, where the treasurer has, in fact, signed off on the Bell City pensions? Would this change that function at all?
I don't believe so.
Say again?
I do not believe so.
I
do not believe so.
Thank you.
Mr. Liu. Mr. Liu?
Yes. I have a question for author.
Without objection.
Pack of analysis that I got, it doesn't have this bill in there, so I don't know if it's a different number or if we don't have analysis yet. And if you could, because I know what this bill does. If you could give me an analysis, that'd be good. Because
it's in your pack of analysis, but I can give you the analysis sheet that I have in my hand.
Okay, seeing no further questions or debate, Mr. Blumenfield, you may close.
Respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Mr. Calderon moves the call. Okay, members, we are going to stand in brief recess upon call of the chair, and there will be no passes granted.